Hello. So, still reading about David, rereading about David again after some time, and I just have gotten to like I'm past it now, but I've been kind of percolating on. So the story of David's sin, right, with Bathsheba, right? We familiar with the story, but and again, don't take me as gospel. Read the word for yourself. That is my whole that's like so important to just read it for yourself. Don't just listen to what people say about it. Read it for yourself and let the Lord speak to you and the Holy Spirit guide you. But it's just a couple things that really jumped out to me about the story of Bathsheba and everything there, right? Because leading up to the time, which is chapter, when does it start? One second. So chapter 11 is about like the story with Bathsheba and how David sins and basically he sees her from the roof, thinks she's so beautiful, brings her and sleeps with her, and then she's pregnant, so he calls her husband back from war and then sends him out and basically just has him killed because he first tries to get him to sleep with her so that he can believe the child is his and everything can just act like nothing happened. And but then he ends up killing Uriah because he doesn't sleep with his wife when he calls him back, so he's like, send him to the front and everybody else step back and let him die. And um, but at the very beginning of this chapter, because the chapters leading up to it have been where David is just doing so many good things and the right things, right? Like um, Nathan, I sometimes I say Samuel when I mean Nathan, but Nathan the prophet comes to him, and at one point, and even is just saying like, do whatever is in your heart to do because the Lord is with you. You basically you're just going to be blessed forever. Like if you read it, it's just this wow, this amazing thing. Like there will always be someone representing your family on the throne, all these things, right? So all these good things. And then he goes and he's doing all these good deeds, defeating, like Philistines and all that stuff. And then like even the story where he goes and finds Jonathan's son that was injured as they fled Jerusalem, so he's not able to walk and he's paralyzed in both feet, and just brings him in to eat at the king's table and gives him back everything that belonged to Saul. He gives to this child. I can't remember what they call him in Samuel, but I know in one of them his name is Mephibosheth, which is fun to say. That's why I remember it. But anyway, so he's doing all these great things and everything's going really well, right? And then at the beginning of the chapter, it's like that's when we have to be like so careful, is when things are going well and everything's great, right? Like, and then it says like um at the at the turn of the year, the time when kings go out to war, David sent Joab along with his officers and all Israel, and they laid waste to the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. David himself remained in Jerusalem, right? Because he's doing so well. He's doing all these good things. The Lord has said, hey, do whatever's in your heart to do. I'm going to bless you. And so he's like, I don't really need to go out, right? Which I'm not saying necessarily he did or there's nothing. I just, to me, take note of that. The time that kings go to war, David didn't. And then David is home and he sees, and so everybody else is out at battle. And so this woman is without her husband all the time when all these husbands aren't around, and he's there and he sees her and wants her. And so all this stuff starts, and during the process of it, you can kind of just tell, sort of, as reading it, like he's gotten a little comfortable because he's not doing like when the whole incident with the Ark of the Covenant happened, everything where he steps back and he's like, okay, something's wrong. I need to figure out, did I do wrong? When this whole instance, like right when she says she's pregnant and everything, like he doesn't stop and examine himself at that point in time, going, oh my gosh, what did I do? Instead he's like, well, I let me think, figure out how to fix this. Like it gets into fix it mode, and then the fix it mode, the first one doesn't work, and then so he takes it's like a slippery slope, and then he goes, and then once, and he doesn't even realize what he's done, because so many times one of the differences I see with between Saul and David is almost every time that Saul, like, that the Lord really spoke to Saul about something, it was through a prophet almost all the time. And even then, it took him a little bit to understand, and he got confused and he didn't follow directions quite right. But there's so many times where the Lord speaks directly to David, where David goes and seeks the Lord, and he doesn't need require a prophet. But at this point, he's not even dealing with it, probably because the sin is so grievous, he doesn't want to face it, right? Because I know we do that. There's sometimes we'll make a choice and if we acknowledge that it's a sin and it's a wrong and it's a terrible thing, there's a whole lot of grief and unraveling we have to do. And so instead, the world makes it really easy for us to just like go, no, no, it's okay. This is normal. Other people do this too. Kind of like, you make peace with it because we don't want to process it, right? And so this is one of the times that Nathan is required. He needs a prophet to come in, and he can't even say it directly. He has to tell them a story, right? And the story is really the point for me, like, or well, the thing that jumps out at me is in the story that Nathan tells David, where he's basically saying there was a rich man who had tons of flocks of sheep and all of the stuff. He had so much stuff, right? And then there was a poor man who had only one sheep, and he treated it like a child, and had it, cared for it, like slept with it, like snuggling it, and like not in a gross way, but like and like fed it from his hand, and like treated it like this little beloved sheep, right? And this rich man, um, a traveler comes through, passing through, right? And in order to feed the traveler, he takes the sheep of the poor man and slaughters it and prepares a meal and gives it to this, instead of taking some of his own flock, right? And then David, of course, after the story, like David is furious and says, "This, who is this man? Tell me who he is. I'm going to, he will pay, right? And then Nathan says, like, it's you. Like, what you did with Bathsheba and with Uriah is not okay. Because for one thing, with Bathsheba, like sometimes I think I forget when I hear the story, like I take for granted that she didn't really have a choice. She, whatever people will say, well, she shouldn't be bathing on the roof. And, people have said, I've read things where they talk like I don't know what the heck happened, but she had no husband. She has a husband who apparently loved her very much. Being one wife of a husband is very different, I'm sure, than being part of a harem, as far as like the bond you share with that person. And, and she gets called to the king, and she doesn't really have a whole lot of choice. He sleeps with her, kind of sends her back, like just kind of like a, and then when she's find out she's pregnant, she is like, what do I do? This wasn't even my choice. And so, like it's just like this terrible situation, right, that happens. And then it progresses into that, which really ends up being murder. Like he ends up murdering him, and in order to keep the secret of what the wrong he has done is and all that, and then he is later punished, goes forward, like the punishment for this one. I guess that's the other thing that is super, I think, really important about the story is like, up until this point, right, Nathan's first prophecy to him and everything is like, do what you will, the Lord is with you. But Nathan's new prophecy is, because you have done this, first of all, the child that she's pregnant with will die. Like that child's not going to live because of what you've done. And then before, where it's like all these wonderful things in this beautiful future, instead it says the sword will never leave your house and your children. And when you go on to read the things, the terrible, terrible things that happen with his kids, and just so many terrible, shameful things. And it's like those things were triggered by this one event, and it all started with a traveler passing through. And I love this because there are so many things that happen in life. And as I said, I've had a history with addiction, and that kind of thing. And I understand this concept of the traveler passing through, right? After I came out of drug addiction, and like, because I went to my time at Walter Hoving Home, right? And then, which I've mentioned many times before, but um, there were times where I had the same, like the old behavior, the thoughts, the desire for some, like, because especially pain medication was really what took me down. Like the desire would be there, but this story like came to mind, and I was like, it's a traveler passing through, that craving, that sudden intense desire, that need. It is not permanent. It is not something that is going to stay, and I'm going to always need to feed this, and I'm going to always need, this is somebody passing through, and like they're going to be gone. And so he could have, for one, I mean, yes, of course, you could do the ideal way would be to go and pray to the Lord and resist the devil, and he will flee from you, and then like draw near to God, and God will draw near to you. That's from the book of James. And just like you could do that way, ideally, but in this story, he had other options. Okay, he has this intense attraction to this woman. He had so many like wives and concubines. Like, I mean, he didn't have as many as Solomon had, but he had a lot. He could have just gone and been with one. He could have redirected it back to something that belonged to him. And he could have fed that passer through, that traveler that was going to be gone the next day, was going to be gone. But instead, it's kind of like that whole Esau situation where they talk about Esau like, um, just for because he was so hungry at one time, he gave away his entire birthright for that one moment of hunger, And there's so many things that that are like that. They feel so intense and so like I don't have a choice. But that's the difference. I think that when we have the Holy Spirit, when we receive forgiveness and when we choose to walk in a way that honors the Lord and the Holy Spirit enables us to do so, one of the differences is we still have the temptations, we still feel those things, but we have a choice. And like, because I know for me, before I went to Walter Hoving, before I really got that personal relationship with the Lord, when I would have drug cravings and stuff, like when I would want it felt like there was no choice. There was no choice. Like I would be like, I would get voices like my internal voice, like where I'm talking to myself, I would just be like, I would kind of start to wrestle out, like, should I do this? Should I not try and get this? And it would be like, you're going to do it. Stop wasting time. And it was just kind of like one of those things because I couldn't wrestle it out in my head. I didn't have the power in me to resist this sin, right? It had taken hold of me. And then after I was at Walter Hoving Home and I had really gotten away from it and the Lord had just become a new creation, it was kind of like, I remember having this one time where I was tempted in a way I'd been tempted before. And I started to hear some of that old chatter in my head. And then I said, wait a minute, you're not going to do it. So why are you wasting your time thinking about it? And it was just different because I had a choice. I was more aware of that whole process before it just would happen. And then it was before I knew it, I was, getting whatever I needed. Right. But then it was like, no, I have a choice now. It still can be a really big temptation. And since then, it's not as much the temptations I face daily are not usually that anymore. That's kind of, I guess maybe it's that resist the devil and he will flee from you. Eventually that becomes, you become a slave of righteousness and it's just not the same thing. But there are other ones that come up where all of a sudden it's so intense and maybe it's, I need to fix this problem because that can be, I need to do these things and accomplish what I think I need. Maybe it's like, even sometimes it's like gossiping or just those kind of things that that we're more socially comfortable with, and so we don't notice as much. And it's like in that moment to remember this craving, this thought, because especially if it's like romantically, like it was for David, like attraction, those can be so intense. And it's like to remember this is a traveler passing through. And tomorrow, once the traveler has left, once this desire and this intense feeling has left, I can be left with either shame over something I've done or I can be victorious, whereas I think that before I really had the Holy Spirit, I didn't necessarily have the same kind of choice in that. I did to some extent, but it was all based on human willpower. But when you have the Holy Spirit enabling you, then you do have a choice. And I just think it's like it helped me keep in perspective when those strong urges and those emotional things come to be like, wait a minute, this is passing through. Because I think emotions are very much like that too. We have emotional responses and we feel like everything's like, because I have it with my physical problems and pain days that I get that I've been having a lot of lately. And it's like remembering this is also a traveler passing through. And I could be tempted to do things. I could be tempted to go back to try and get prescription medication when I know that that's something I don't really want in my life again, because of the levels of pain I'm dealing with. But it's like this is a traveler passing through, and it's I like I'm not gonna treat things like they're permanent, and I need to fix it. I need to seek the Lord, resist the devil, and he will flee from me. And the Lord always, even if I'm having pain, like if the Lord wants to heal this, if the Lord wants to take this away, he can. It might be that I need to learn, I need to change first, right, to receive what he was for me. So it's like having that faith and trust that these things are passing through and at the right time, and that I will I will be able to see him if I'm, what is that oh, if I'm thinking if we faint not, it's like, oh gosh, let me think, what is that passage? I remember. It's do not be weary in well doing, for in due season we will reap a harvest if we faint not. Like there are times where it feels like you can't get through it, but if we just hold on, eventually the Lord will bring that harvest, will bring the other side of it. But it's like we have to go through the faint not part where it's like letting it teach us, letting it guide us, letting it enrich who we are, because the difficulties of life are a refining process, right? And we cannot, if we go through life refusing to be refined, then, but I'm totally getting off topic. I know my ping pong ball is turning into a pinball, but I guess what I'm saying is reminding myself when those temptations, whatever they may be, if they're just emotional things, desire for something, a lust for something, a pride, that gives me that where I'm doing something to please myself in a moment instead of like in a way that's costly, and what is it? There's another passage. I want to say it's in Romans or something. And it says like, it's talking about when you become a slave to sin, when you present your body parts to sin, to obey sin, did you become slaves to sin because you are slaves to the one you obey. But it's like, and what it goes on to say, and what benefit did you reap from those things of which you are now ashamed? And it's like in those moments when I get triggered to gossip, to try and take problems into my own hands, to give way and full vent to my emotions, and like just let my emotional things take over and like overwhelm everything, or like whatever it is, like what benefit did I reap? I reaped shame. And what benefit does David reap? Like the whole thing, like so his whole, like when you go forward in the story, that the tragedy that never leaves his family is very difficult. Like I can't even imagine, especially from where it began, where everything was like, seemed like it was just coming up roses, right? And like, I don't know, it's just for the sake of that one traveler, for that passing moment, even though in that moment it feels impossible, the Holy Spirit makes it possible for us to draw near to him, and let God draw near to us, and to resist the devil and he will flee from us. To, in that same passage in James, it goes on to say, like, humble yourselves, like turn your laughter to weeping, do all these things, make it low, be willing to be suffering while you go through this, and then in due time the Lord will lift you up. And then it's different, then there's no shame, then there is victory, even if it's not like that high. It's like it's honoring him, and it's a peace, and then going forward it's different. Because I know for me, especially with the drug things and those kind of really intense desires that were based on lifestyle where I had been giving into them previously, it's like I can't say a specific number, but there were a couple of them at the beginning, and it was very difficult. But every time that I resisted the devil and he fled and the Lord showed up, the next time it happened, I had that to pull on, go, no, no, I just need to wait this out. It'll go away. And then little by little, it stopped happening. And eventually it was just like, it's kind of like like Satan's like, oh, I know how to get this one. Okay, that's not working. Okay, that's still not working. Okay, well, let's go find something different. Like it's just like, they're like, I'm not saying like I became perfect and I still followed other places, but like that one, it was just eventually like, okay, this button's broken. So let's stop pushing this one. It doesn't work the same way it used to. Doesn't mean I don't need to stay on guard that someday it might not become a problem again, but it's just like that feeling of, okay, if I do resist a couple times, eventually it won't be like this. It won't be so intense, and it won't be like, because there's a part of those cravings where you just kind of feel like, if I keep putting it off and it just keeps getting stronger, and then you just feel like, okay, I'm just going to give in. But if you really are able to resist, it does eventually change, and eventually those cravings and those desires fade, and they're just not used anymore the same way. But anyway, I feel like I'm kind of getting rambly, so I will stop here.